Great. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. I'm very excited about the panel today because I think we've got three representatives of three very interesting companies that in many ways epitomize the kinds of trends that we've been talking about in terms of Webb squared. So I'd like to introduce my panelists, Maynard Webb, who's chairman and CEO of LiveOps. And then following him is Liam Casey, founder and CEO of PCH International. And then Josh Green, who's founder and CEO of Panjiva. So these are three very interesting companies. We'll be going into a fair amount of detail on what they do and what's so different relative to more traditional business models. I just wanted to say that as the chairman of the Center for the Edge, I view each of these three companies as clearly operating on the edge, not in the sense of on the fringe and about to fall off, but in the sense of an edge that is going to transform the core over time. And so I think these are early indicators of the kinds of practices, the kinds of institutions that we're going to be seeing with increasing frequency in our business landscape. So it's a great chance to get an early view. I'm also excited because, I'm intrigued with the pattern that's emerged over the past couple of days in that we've been talking about Webb squared and the web is the world, and yet when I look at the topics and the panels and the sessions that we've had, we've covered things like search, games, entertainment, journalism, digital art. There's a pattern here, and it's all about digital media in one form or another. And if this is truly the web is the web is the world has to be about transformation of physical products, physical businesses. It reminds me, I was in a conversation several years ago with Jack Welch at GE, and was waxing eloquent about the impact of the internet and the World Wide Web on business, and I was giving great compelling examples like Google. And he just stopped me in mid-sentence at one point. He said, "John, this is all really interesting, but I'm in a different kind of business. I deal with products you can feel and touch, and jet engines and electric light bulbs, and what does this have to do with me?" And so my hope and my expectation is that this panel is actually going to start to bring it home in terms of physical products and more traditional businesses and how this is changing their world as well. So one more setting of the stage before we dive into a discussion of the specific companies. I just wanted to report on one finding from a research report that we just produced a couple of months ago called the Shift Index. And what the Shift Index tried to do was step back and say, when we look at all the indices that business executives and policymakers tend to focus on in terms of trying to understand the world around them, those metrics tend to be very short-term in focus. It's all about inflation rates, unemployment rates, currency exchange, and yet we all agree we're in the middle of some longer-term profound shift that's reshaping our business landscape. But there is no real index to measure that and to give us a sense of where we are on that transition. So we took on the challenge of developing such an index, and it's attracted a fair amount of attention since it was released. And probably the metric that attracted the most attention, that I think provides a good context for today's discussion, is we just decided let's look at, for a bottom line measure, let's look at return on assets for all public companies in the United States. But let's look at it over a reasonable period of time rather than focusing on quarter to quarter. Let's pull back and look at what's happened to return on assets for all public companies in the United States since 1965. Anybody want to hazard a guess? Over that time period, return on assets has basically collapsed in the United States. Back in 1965, we were earning a return on the assets deployed that was 3 times the return on assets that we enjoy today. So we've declined by 75%. Now, there have been ups and downs corresponding to economic cycles along the way, but the trend line is a long-term, sustained, and significant erosion of profitability. And yet nobody's really focused on that. We're all concerned about how are we coming out of this downturn, when will we hit bottom, when will we start to move back up. I think one of the key messages from this metric is there is no back to normal. If you think you're going back to where you were, think again. The long-term trend line says this is continuing to erode. You are under increasing competitive pressure, and the business practices you have been pursuing in all public companies in the United States are fundamentally broken. It's time to step back and reflect and say, given the changes that are going on, in many respects driven by digital infrastructures, what can we do differently to really start to make a difference in this return on assets trend? Because doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is probably not the answer that you want to be looking for. So I encourage you, if you're interested in the report, it's available on the internet. It can be downloaded as a PDF. But I think it sets the stage, because I think the reaction when I talk about companies like these to my clients is, wow, that's really interesting. That's a great opportunity. We'll think about it. Someday we'll actually maybe get involved. I want to, if there's one key takeaway from this panel, it's these different ways of doing business are not an option. They're an imperative. We have to rethink at a very fundamental level the nature of work given the business landscape we're in. So with that as context, maybe if I could just turn to Maynard to begin and ask, you've stated that the purpose of LiveOps at one level is to revolutionize work. And I think that might be an interesting way to get into the subject and talk about how are you revolutionizing work.
Absolutely. Thank you, John. And it's a pleasure to be here today. LiveOps is all about doing for the world of work what I had the privilege of helping eBay do for the world of commerce. We actually have two main product lines, Contact Center in the Cloud, which is a SaaS platform that Salesforce.com, for example, uses to help power their call center. Or West Marine laid off their buildings and sent their people home on our platform, which we thought was innovative. So instead of people losing their jobs, the building lost their job, which was cool. And then we have a product line that's called the Workforce in the Cloud, which has 20,000 plus entrepreneurs working on our platform every day for a whole host of clients like American Idol Gives Back or Kodak, and they work on their terms. They decide who they want to work for, when they want to work, 24/7. And the only caveat is they actually have to be good or they can't keep working, because the calls all get routed to the best available agent who's performing. So what businesses get as a result is great access to the best resource, and they only pay for it when they need it. And so we think that's pretty inspiring. And we also have, in that same Workforce in the Cloud, we're inspired to bring more work. We have, by the way, we have thousands more people every week beg for work in our model than we have work to give them. And so we're inspired to find new work types and more career paths, because the people already want to work this way. It's just companies that don't necessarily know how to leverage it. So we're on that, helping to figure out how to get the companies to leverage this.
That's great. So as I hear it, you've got a workforce of 20,000 people in the call center side of your operation.
20,000 people in the agent side of the operation.
The agent side, right.
In the SaaS side, there's probably between 8,000 and 10,000 other people's employees or contractors working on our platform.
Right. But these people are all working out of their homes.
All
They're
out of
not
their
in
homes.
a central office
Right.
anywhere answering phones.
Right. They all work in their home. And now there are call centers that use our platform, like when I mentioned Salesforce, their employees sit in a call center, they just using our technology to route the calls and that kind of stuff.
But it's creating the option for the first time in call center operations to really distribute the work.
Yeah, well, you know, by the way, our agents in general are far more educated than a regular call center agent, and, you know, happier. Our retention rates are unbelievable because they get to choose. And, you know, they work the hours they want to work, and they get to work from home. They don't have to drive in, and they get instant feedback on how they're doing and all that good stuff.
So there's flexibility in terms of hours. What happens if the baby's crying in the background? And
They aren't, they have to schedule work, and for that slot, they aren't allowed to do two different jobs. They have to do the job they're in, and if that happens, that's not very good.
Mm-hmm. And one of the objections, or one of the sources of skepticism about this approach is, you're distributing people out to their homes. You've got no real supervision in terms of the call center manager walking the aisle and seeing how things are going. How do you maintain that quality of the
I'd
calls?
say how do we actually make sure the internet still works, right? I think what we do is it's about rules and frameworks and feedback as opposed to command and control. So I think there's an entire new way the world is going to work, and we've developed all the mechanisms to make sure that they have mirrors and frameworks and that good behavior is rewarded. A lot of this was based on a little bit of the eBay community and how you got buyers and sellers to do the right things and have a marketplace that works. And so we have developed all the mechanisms to let good behavior get rewarded and poor performance get weeded out. And we think that we know we do a better job than agents in your own call center. So there is a science that has to go to the behavioral pieces of getting the right work to the right person and then making sure that that work is as good or better than you would get in a traditional call center.
For those of you who don't know, Maynard, in a prior life before he joined LiveOps, was a senior executive at eBay and very instrumental in helping to build up eBay's supplier communities, highly distributed set of participants in the eBay ecosystem. So a lot of experience to draw on in terms of LiveOps, for sure. Great. Let me turn briefly to Liam, and we can come back and have a broader discussion. But Liam is running PCH, a very interesting company focused in a different set of business activities, manufacturing and fulfillment operations in particular. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how PCH helps your customers, in terms of those operations.
Great, thank you. Basically, we're based in Shenzhen in China. We manage supply chains for some of mostly our Silicon Valley-based clients. So you could actually go online, order a product from one of the leading consumer electronics websites here in the US, and the product will arrive on your door within 2 days. The inventory that's held in China is, 2 days away from the factory, so the transaction time has been really reduced. If you go back a number of years, there would have been possibly anything up to 3 months of inventory, and now it's down to a number of weeks. This is having a huge impact for some of our clients. It's also bringing the barrier to entry for hardware products. It's really bringing the barrier to entry down. So again, we'll have, in some of those products, we'll have been selected the factories, managed the factory process, managed the manufacturing process, and brought the product all the way through. And walking around here yesterday, I would say that it's safe to say that about 70% of the people in this room will have a product that has come through our company at some stage.
And can you talk a little bit more about this barrier to entry issue in terms of how you help companies to get into markets and do it more quickly and more cost effectively? Yeah,
there's probably one company that would be familiar with here. Some people would know Chumby. That's a product which we actually brought to market. I mean, that's a company that had only less than, in hardware, it had only one person, one hardware engineer. And we orchestrated the whole supply chain in China. It's a Linux operating system, so it was a computer. It had a touch screen, it had quite a lot of technologies going on. We had about 10 factories involved in that manufacturing process. Their working capital requirement was greatly reduced by the fact that you could actually do everything in one location. Other clients that we work with, they're very strong on design, branding, sales and marketing. And again, they actually design their products here. We actually do the outsourcing of the manufacturing in China. But we see great opportunities for design companies and for brand companies to really bring products to market now, to bring hardware products to market now that didn't exist before, because the working capital requirement was too high. VCs don't like it. The hardware is going to take too long to develop it. Whereas now those barriers are coming down. Again, you'll have seen this week where Barnes & Noble just launched the Nook. We understand that Barnes & Noble didn't have a team in place in January of this year. So you take a company that, what we call disruptive commerce is where you have a company that has a disruptive technology, we have a disruptive supply chain, you put them together, you get disruptive commerce.
So the same kind of disruption we're seeing in the software industry and digital media is now starting to
and we see
the physical products.
Yeah, and the Web 2.0 technologies. I mean, we have people that sit in, that work on the various client teams in China, and they're monitoring the blogs because they're watching for feedback on the products, and they can tell our clients faster because they're live watching the blogs during the day in China, and they're seeing what's happening, and we can make changes real time to products based on the client's feedback as well as the consumer's feedback. And again, when you take we see huge opportunity for the Web 2.0 companies, because if you've got a passionate customer service strategy like somebody like Zappos, and you put that together with a hardware technology, you can really manage your community. So we see the companies that really own and manage communities are the companies that can actually really bring products to market. And when you've got barriers to entry from data and the amount of data you can capture and transfer at a very fast pace, we see huge opportunities there for companies to really, get into the market much easier than before.
And you touched on it a bit, but can you go into just a little more detail? I mean, some people would say, well, wait a minute, what you're talking about is outsourcing and offshoring. That's been done for a long time. What role are Web 2.0 technologies playing that make this a different game at this point?
Data is the heartbeat of supply chain. Okay, and if you can get real live data instantaneously, whether it's through Twitter or whether it's through, just through the blogs, you can actually get, you can actually reduce risk in a big way.
Mm-hmm. I'd also add to that says, well, due to Web 2.0 technologies, outsourcing traditionally has been to a country.
Yes.
That's constraining.
Yes.
Why can't you source the world and get the best resource at the best price at the quality you want and decide where it is, whether it's in the U.S. or somewhere else? So why put those constraints in place?
One of the things which we do as well is that, we found it about 10 years ago where we were we're managing our client's business here in California, and we would get we're getting great feedback from our clients because they were saying that your customer service is better than any of the other companies we deal with in China. And so after a while we realized what was happening was that factories in China were getting calls from the clients. What happened, the client would go into work in the morning here at 8 o'clock, they'd check their emails, they'd see problems coming in from the factories, they'd immediately pick up the phone, they'd call China, it's midnight in China, and they're talking to somebody who's speaking a second language, they're tired, they've been working all day, and everything goes great. They ask questions, they get yes, they ask to repeat the question, and it's a problem. Right. So what we've done is we actually put our customer service people in Ireland. So what happens is somebody in California calls Ireland at 8 in the morning, it's 4 in the afternoon in Ireland, they get a cheeky Irish accent at the other end of the phone. That person has been in the office since 8 o'clock in the morning, and they've been talking to China at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So there's a much better relationship there, and it's just time zones. And globalization is new, and it's a challenge for everybody. I think Gordon Brown said it in January at Davos. He said that we're really struggling with globalization. It's new, and it's something that that we've worked in silos in the past, whereas now there's huge opportunity to work in truly globalized. But we need to look at different geographies are good for different tasks.
One of the things that's coming out for me in the discussion is if I think about where most large Western companies have gone over the past several decades in supply chain and product innovation, distribution channels, it's been to narrow the number of participants, to get slimmer and rely on fewer people, fewer participants, fewer companies. and they've done that in the name of efficiency. Basically, we can manage the complexity much easier. We, by the way, have more bargaining power, so we can squeeze those participants more effectively if there are fewer of them and there's more business at stake. But what they've given up is the flexibility of accessing more specialized resources that are optimized for a particular place and time. And what I hear happening here is reopening that option and using the technology platforms that are available today to make the coordination much more effective.
One of the other areas that we see huge opportunity, we see huge changes in the whole banking industry, because with transaction times are getting shorter, transaction amounts are getting smaller, so risk is being reduced. So therefore, trade finance is going to change in a huge way. And that's all data driven. If you can get the integrity of the information that comes out of a factory in China all the way through to when a product arrives at somebody's door, if you can track that, that greatly reduces risk from a finance point of view. So that reduces the barrier to entry for banks and for other finance companies to really finance transactions. You're looking at transaction times of days rather than months, which happened in the past. So we see huge opportunity for disruption in that space.
Excellent. Joshua, I want to bring you into the conversation. You addressed this issue in your own personal life and professional life, but it led to the idea of creating Panjiva, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the genesis of the company and the problem you were trying to solve.
Sure. I was working at an electronics company and was asked by my boss to find a supplier in China that we could work with. And I, being young and naive, thought this should be pretty straightforward. Went off to do my research and was amazed at how many companies there were around the world that were claiming to be able to do what it was we needed. Equally amazed by how little reliable information I could find on these companies. And at a time when everybody's talking about doing business internationally, didn't make a lot of sense that there wasn't a go-to source for reliable information on all the companies that constitute the global supply base. So got together with a buddy of mine from MIT, and he said, it's a really interesting problem. Technology can be part of the solution here. And from that, we started working on Panjiva. And today, we now have a database of about 1.5 million companies that are engaged in global trade.
1.5 million.
1.5 million companies.
And cutting across what industries?
Essentially all industries, 190 countries. And what you have is an information resource that helps you figure out who's doing what. So if you were a U.S. company, for instance, interested in finding a supplier of patio furniture, you could go online, you could use the Panjiva search engine and immediately find the 449 companies in China that make patio furniture, and you could learn about them, who their customers are, how healthy they are. And the idea is to really introduce efficiency and accountability into the world of global trade, which hasn't really been known for either. I think our belief is that information can be a powerful tool in the world of business, but I think that the distance between where we are today and the potential for information to really transform business, that distance is huge. There's a lot of work to be done.
And talk a little bit, as I understand it, the business, the concept has evolved over time in terms of where you thought the initial value was going to be in the data and how it actually turned out.
Yeah, so our original premise was to build up a database solely using user-generated content. And it was a little bit like if Google had said, hey, everybody come to our website and tell us which websites are good websites. Never would have gotten from here to there. We realized that we weren't going to get there, and much like Google used links as votes for websites, we used shipments as votes for suppliers. So we looked at what suppliers had been shipping a lot and said, well, that tells us something about how experienced the supplier is. So we used publicly available data that had been available for years, and built a core data set. And since then have started layering on top additional information, because each time we would take the information that we had to clients, we'd hear from clients, well, this is really interesting, but it'd be great if you could tell me X. And at first this made me crazy, because I thought, I'm bringing you more information than you've ever had, and you're asking for even more. And then ultimately we realized, no, that's the opportunity. Our clients are telling us about the information that they need to do their jobs today. And if we can get that information and serve it up to them in a user-friendly way, that's creating real value. And so over time, the Panjiva project has really transformed into identifying the questions that our clients, Fortune 500 companies, and entrepreneurs have, identifying data sources that might enable us to answer those questions, and then negotiating access and integrating those data sources into what has now become a platform for intelligence on global trade.
And as I understand it, one of your competitors in this space, or a company doing a similar kind of thing, Alibaba, tends to focus on data that's provided by the suppliers themselves. And I wonder if you could talk about how you view that versus the kind of approach that you're taking on this.
Yeah. Alibaba is an amazing company and deserves tremendous credit, I think, for getting much of the Chinese manufacturing base online. But the way they did it was by essentially inviting these companies to publish information about themselves, marketing materials. And in fact, it was one of the first resources I discovered when I was doing my research on suppliers. And I didn't feel comfortable going to my boss and saying, hey, this company says it's great, and this company says it works with every big company, we should work with them. And I think it speaks to a drawback of solely relying on user-generated content. So we said, no, there's got to be a better way, and started looking for data sources that felt a little bit more objective. But I'm a believer that any one data source has its weaknesses, and so the real value that can be created is through taking multiple data sources, triangulating on answers, so that when people are making business-critical decisions, they can do so with confidence.
I want to invite, if there are questions from the audience, if anyone wants to come up to one of the microphones, we can start to take some questions as well. But in the interim, I just wanted to pose, I think there's an interesting trend that at least two of you have, and maybe a third, is you're extending the business in terms of opening it up to other kinds of third parties to get involved. So you've got, I believe it's LiveWork, is that
yes.
The platform, and you've got on Panjiva coming in. And I don't know, Liam, if there's a similar kind of initiative on your side, but it's interesting that these companies seem to be evolving into more of platform businesses that are creating a platform that others can ride on top of and deliver more value to customers. I wonder if you could talk just briefly about that.
Well, you heard me mention a few minutes ago that I'm not a fan of constraints. And so in our current capability, agents can only make so much money and they have to be on the phone. And so LiveWork is all about creating new work types and new career paths so that you can create a BPO company on our platform if you want and make as much money as you can do. Or BPOs that have inefficiencies and excess capacity can find work to tie that in. And what LiveWork is all about is doing high quality work as good or better than you get in your own center for about half the cost. And so things like transcription, for example, which an agent, while they're having a little bit of downtime, can do transcription waiting for that next call, right? And so they make more money, companies get better results. It's kind of a beautiful thing.
That's great.
So.
We would see a great opportunity as well where we work with entrepreneurs or designers or brand companies that they want to use our platform to bring a product to market. So yesterday we heard Brooke Burke here, and she was talking about authenticity and about her brand and about the 1.5 million followers. There's no reason why she can't come up with a hardware product that can be brought to market. Go back a couple of years, that would have been impossible. Okay, so the barriers to entry for her to bring a product to market is very, very low. Likewise, Mike Arrington talks about a crunch pad. That's a great idea, and it's something that a company like TechCrunch can do. So the barriers to entry have changed completely.
Tell me a bit about Panjiva.
Yeah, I was saying earlier that each conversation I would have with a client, they'd say, this is great, but I'd also like to know X. Similarly, I feel like most meetings that I go to, I hear about another source of data that exists. In fact, I was hearing about a source from Liam. After this panel, I'm going to be hitting him up for some data. But we kept hearing that there were more and more data sources out there. And the reality is a lot of data resides inside organizations whose primary purpose is not getting data out into the world. Mm-hmm. And so we looked at Apple and said, well, they're doing it with the App Store. This is a great model. Let's say to the world of data providers, look, you've got valuable data. You can extract some value from it by getting it into the hands of decision makers. We're interacting with decision makers. They're asking us for data. The On Panjiva program was essentially our way of marrying the demand for data with the supply of data. And we essentially invited organizations to apply to publish their data on Panjiva. And it was pretty amazing because we got started. We're still a startup, still a small company, and we had an amazing array of people applying to publish their data, from a small startup that was itself just starting to collect data about furniture factories, all the way up to D&B, formerly Dun & Bradstreet, that applied to publish their data on Panjiva.
Interesting. Having a hard time seeing out there if there is somebody at the mic over here.
Hi, my name is Nicole Poindexter, and I've actually heard you, John, speak about the Shift Index before and found it very fascinating. And as I understand it, one of your hypotheses for companies increasing their return of assets is to increase the interconnectedness of their employees with the rest of the world or their industries, et cetera. That said, to varying degrees, your three panelists seem to be increasing the atomization of the workforce and sort of separation. And I was wondering if you could all sort of speak to that agglomeration of issues and return on assets and how you are affecting that.
One of the things we would say, if you look at a company like Barnes & Noble starting out with a hardware device earlier this year without having a team, what we say about in the hardware business, if you have nothing, you have everything. I mean, so you need to be really asset light, because if you have infrastructure, and if it's old infrastructure in place, you've got distribution models in place, you've got manufacturing facilities in place, then you have a huge problem. We know another company that actually had its own manufacturing facilities. It actually took them 4 years to actually bring a similar device to market. So not actually owning the asset, being asset light, is a huge advantage, and that's where we see huge opportunities for the brands that actually, where they leverage their brands, leverage design and the consumer experience, really managing the consumer experience, and that's managing your communities. So the companies with the communities, if that's their asset, they can really leverage it.
I would just say the role of corporations is changing in a major way. In the U.S., this is before the meltdown. 1 out of 4 people had been in their jobs less than a year. 1 out of 2, less than 5 years. I think the role is, how do you bring the workforce the same feel you used to get in a corporation and across multiple kind of work types. So we work really hard to try to do that with our communities and use social networking technologies and things like that to try to help build the camaraderie and the spirit. I think there's going to be, the days of the paternalistic corporation are long gone, and I think the companies that know how to leverage virtual workforces and make them feel loved and be opted into are going to get the best resources. So I think the days of normal companies are being the way they used to be are long gone.
Yeah, I would just say too that I think the patterns that we're seeing here are very consistent with this knowledge, this theme around flows and being more effective in participating in flows. One of the challenges that large companies face, at least from my experience, is they are very inwardly focused because they've got so much resource internally. They're all about figuring out how to connect more effectively and efficiently within the enterprise, and they lose sight, and in many respects they dismiss the need to really connect much more aggressively with companies outside. And again, I talked about this trend of narrowing the number of participants that you deal with in large operations, which I think, again, diminishes your opportunity to participate in flows. My belief is one of the key trends we're going to face is more and more specialization among enterprises and among people. And as you specialize, you have to coordinate much and participate in flows much more aggressively than if you have it all within your own four walls and you don't feel the need to connect out as aggressively with other people, other companies. So I think that that's a key theme that I see emerging from these business models. And I do apologize. We are keeping strict time here. We could go on for a long period of time. We will be going off to lunch, and the panel members will be available for further discussion and questions more informally. But I appreciate your taking the time and attention for this panel. Thank you very much.